In the dark, a heavy knock shattered the quiet prayers of a family, dragging a terrified father into the cold stone of the Roman public square. The sick smell of burning incense filled the air as soldiers pushed him toward an altar. He faced an impossible choice in the dirt. This was the year 250, the start of the Decian persecution. The early Christian believers were trapped in a nightmare. Guards lined the streets, waiting to see who would bow down to the empire's false gods, and who would refuse. To say no meant a brutal end. To say yes meant saving your life, but giving away your soul in front of the town. The cold wind carried the cries of those who stayed strong and the silent tears of those who broke. Emperor Decius did not just want to hurt people randomly. He built a chilling, highly organized trap to test the loyalty of the entire empire. He ordered every person to offer a sacrifice to the Roman gods while an official watched. It was a massive dragnet designed to catch anyone who followed Christ. There was no place to hide from the guards. If you followed the terrible order and burned the incense, officials handed you a small piece of paper called a libellus. This simple certificate was your proof of loyalty. It was a dark ticket that allowed you to buy food and walk the streets. Without it, you were an enemy of the state, thrown into dark cells. The system was cold and designed to break a believer. Under the dark threat of the torture chamber, many good, devoted people simply cracked. The human mind and body can only take so much fear. Mothers and fathers who loved their church found themselves shaking as they walked up to the altar. They dropped the pinch of incense into the fire, their heads hanging low in deep, crushing shame. As the smoke drifted up, they grabbed their paper certificates and ran home to their terrified children, crying the entire way. They saved their families, but guilt ate away at them. These broken believers became known as the Lapsi, the ones who had fallen away. The heavy weight of what they did in that square haunted them, turning survival into a nightmare. But in the shadows of this test, an unsettling secret began to spread. Terrified of the pain, some Christians found a way to cheat the brutal system. A hidden black market sprang up in the back alleys of Roman cities. People realized officials were greedy, and money could buy what courage could not. Believers began slipping silver to corrupt guards to buy a fake certificate. They never burned the incense, but they held the paper that said they did. This chilling procedure saved lives, but it created a messy gray area. They had not bowed to false gods, but they lied to the world, paying blood money to look like they'd turned their backs on the church. Then, in the year 251, the emperor died, and the persecution suddenly stopped. The terrible threat was gone, the fires burned out, and an eerie quiet fell over the Roman world. But for the believers who survived, the real nightmare was just beginning. The church had to figure out what to do with the broken people left in the wreckage. Unsettling scenes played out at church doors across the land. The Lapsi crept out of the shadows, weeping and begging to be allowed back inside. They fell on their knees in the dirt, pleading for forgiveness from the people who watched them deny their faith. This desperate cry for grace sparked a massive controversy, forcing the early church to face the hardest question of all. A strict leader named Decian stepped forward with a terrifying answer. He looked at the weeping crowds and locked the doors. His rule was simple and cold. If you denied your faith to save your life, you were out forever. There were no second chances, no matter how many tears you cried. He believed the church was only for the pure, and the broken people outside were no longer welcome. This harsh choice caused sheer terror. For these early believers, the church was not just a building. It was the only safe ship in a dark sea. Being locked out meant being cut off from God completely. Decian told them their apologies meant nothing to him. The people who cracked under the threat of torture were left to face a lonely, hopeless future with no way back home. Across the sea, another leader carried a very heavy burden. His name was Cyprian, the bishop of Carthage. When the terrible hunts began, Cyprian had run away and hid in the shadows to stay alive. Now the danger was gone, and he came back to a ruined family. He walked through his city and saw a deeply broken flock. A profound and unsettling choice weighed on his heart. On one side, he saw the weeping faces of those who had failed the test, begging for a little grace. On the other side, angry, hardline believers demanded that the traitors be pushed away forever. Cyprian felt torn in two. How could he keep the rules strong without crushing the spirits of the people he loved? While the leaders argued, a shocking twist threw everything into chaos. A small group of brave people had survived the worst of the Roman prisons. They were tortured, beaten, and scarred, but they never gave up their faith. People called them the confessors. Because they had suffered so much, everyone looked up to them as living heroes. Soon these scarred survivors started taking matters into their own hands. The heroes began writing their own small notes of forgiveness. They handed these free passes to the weeping people who had failed. A broken person could just walk up to a scarred hero, ask for help, and get a piece of paper that said they were forgiven. They skipped the leaders completely. The official rules were ignored, and a wild, messy rush for quick grace flooded the streets. Cyprian knew he had to step in and stop this wild free-for-all. The quick passes were tearing the community apart. He realized a chilling truth about human nature and grace. If forgiveness was too easy to get, it insulted the memory of the brave friends who had died for the truth. It made their sacrifice look cheap, but the opposite was just as dangerous. If forgiveness was completely impossible, it would destroy the souls of the people who survived. Cyprian saw that a fast track to grace helped no one. But locking the doors forever was cruel. He needed to find a middle path. He had to build a bridge back to the family, but it was going to be a very hard road to walk. This deep struggle gave birth to what became known as the penitential system. It was not just a dry rule written in a dusty book. It was a grueling, painful human ordeal. The leaders decided that a simple apology was not enough to fix the deep damage. If you wanted to be restored to the family, you had to prove your heart was truly changed. The new steps were harsh and heavy. The broken believers had to spend years waiting outside the doors. They wore rough, scratchy rags instead of nice clothes. They sat in the dirt and covered themselves in ashes. Every Sunday they wept publicly as the rest of the believers walked past them. They had to live in a state of deep sorrow, showing everyone the true weight of their mistake before they could finally come home. The harsh new rules did not bring peace. Instead, they broke the church right down the middle. This split became known as the Lapsi Controversy. Families who used to pray together now walked away from each other. The divide was deep and angry. Soon, rival churches stood on the same streets. On one side, strict followers locked their doors. They claimed to be pure and refused to let any broken believer inside. On the other side, Cyprian offered a way back, but it was a long, painful path of public tears. Neighbors had to choose which door to walk through. This split revealed a tragic truth. The days of simple forgiveness were gone. Before the Decian persecution, believers thought grace was a free gift, but the trauma of survival changed everything. The pain of seeing friends taken away made the survivors hard. They could no longer just forgive the people who gave up so easily. Grace was now something you had to buy with years of pain. It became a harsh trade. You give your tears, your dirt, and your public shame, and maybe we give your family back. The beautiful idea of an open welcome was crushed under Roman terror. The early church lost a piece of its heart. Because of this deep pain, a massive shift in power took place. The leaders of the church, like the Bishop of Carthage, took total control. They were no longer just teachers. Now they held the keys to life and death. The bishops became the only judges who could decide if a person was saved or lost forever. The long steps of public sorrow became a tool of strong rule. Leaders used this system to keep tight order over the crowds. If someone stepped out of line, the bishop could push them back out into the cold. The power to lock and unlock the doors changed the church into a strict group. But the heaviest weight fell on the broken believers themselves. Imagine living the rest of your life as a known traitor in your own small town. The Lapsi had to walk down the street carrying that dark mark. They had to look into the eyes of families whose sons died because they refused to bend. The guilt inside their minds never went away. This strict way of handling mistakes did not fade away when the Romans stopped attacking. It became a permanent law. For hundreds of years, this heavy penitential system ruled the Western world. The idea that big mistakes require long, painful acts of sorrow became the official rule of the land. It shaped how kings and everyday people thought about paying for bad choices. The basic belief was set in stone. You cannot just say you are sorry. You have to suffer to make things right. This hard rule grew deep roots, changing the way Western laws judged human failure for centuries. Back in the dusty streets of Carthage, the physical marks of this time were easy to see. The meeting places were full of tired people sitting in separate sections. You could see who was pure and who was broken just by looking at the clothes they wore. The community was back together, but the invisible walls between them would stand tall for the rest of their lives. The physical spaces where believers met were forever changed by these events. New walls and barriers were put up to keep the broken away from the pure. A husband who stood firm might pray inside the warm main hall, while his wife, who signed the Roman paper to save their children, had to kneel outside in the cold dirt. Whole families were split apart every week. The community was no longer a single united group. Instead, it was a divided camp, marked by the heavy silence between those who survived by hiding and those who survived by giving in. The tiny scrap of Roman paper that started it all was just a simple receipt, yet it carried the weight of life and death. The dark ink on those small records eventually faded into dust, but the deep lines drawn between the people of Carthage never did. Forgiveness was no longer a free gift given with open arms. It had become a heavy debt, paid tier by tier by those kneeling in the dirt outside the locked doors.